I'm Ted Meyer in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Chris Downey in Piedmont, California.
Hi, Chris. It's great to have you here. Maybe you could start by giving us a little of your medical history.
It was back in 2007, actually 2008, when I was diagnosed with a brain tumor, a meningioma that was located right at my optic nerves. I was experiencing very slow sight loss before the surgery. It wasn't significant sight loss, but it was degrading. But I just took it as regular function of I was 45, and eyesight tends to degrade as you get into your 40s, 50s, and so I just took it as normal course. But it was actually in trying to see baseballs being thrown at me by my son that I couldn't really see the ball moving. I did an MRI to discover the tumor and the effect it was causing, that with a visual field analysis coming up with a significant number of blind spots all over my field of vision. So that was a condition I went into surgery with. Everything went according to plan. When I woke up from surgery the next day, my sight was worse than it had been. It was blurry, fuzzy. That's what they expected, but it was there. The next time that I woke up, it was literally half gone, or just half the field of vision was just completely gone. And I was rushed back into ICU. The next time I woke up, it was all gone.
Could have probably played for the Mets at that point. my hometown team that I've loved since I was a child, who never seemed to be able to win. So, I watched your interview on 60 Minutes with my partner, and she's like, oh, he's smiling all the time. And she wanted to know whether you feel your disposition, like, do you have a unique disposition that helped you immediately go back to work?
There's some of that. Sometimes I attribute it to being trained in the creative arts as a designer, and that you revel in sort of the thorniest challenge, the problem that doesn't have an answer, perhaps a problem that defies an answer, and that in those challenges, in those struggles, typically some pretty interesting and very valuable and worthwhile and successful things come out of it.
I think everyone that knows your story just wonders how you can be an architect without having eyesight. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your visual memory and how you approach it, and how someone who's blind could still be doing something that seems so visual to the rest of us.
Yeah, no, I have a 45-year rich sort of obsessive visual memory of the environment, of places I've been, of the place that I live, cities that I live in, and places that I've been in the past. They're there, and it actually makes me think of a time when I was off to meet a friend at a restaurant in San Francisco. And it's a restaurant that I hadn't been to without sight. And I only been to it a few times with sight. But I generally had a good idea of where it was. And as I'm walking there, and had turned down the street on the block where it was, and I was thinking, okay, it's mid-block, about closer to this side of mid-block. And as I'm walking, all of a sudden, listening to the cane taps of my cane tip on the concrete, all of a sudden the sound changed, and I could tell the sound was going deep into an alcove. And just in that immediate split second of vivid visual memory of that restaurant popped into mind. The colors, the proportions, the height, everything about it, and this little alcove for the entry on the left side of the building. And I just turn in right towards that sound. And sure enough, as my cane sweeps up left to right, I could hit either side of the alcove. And then I was remembering exactly where the door was, and all that sort of played out just spot on. Not just the visual memory, but it's sort of a visual tied with spatial memory of a place that I hadn't really been to that often. And in terms of how to construct that in my mind, it's something I often talk about in terms of the methodology of how I work has obviously changed. And now I read drawings through touch. Reading the drawings, especially the plans of a building, a space that I'm working on, I'm mentally sort of transposed to that point of connection between my fingertip and the paper, and it puts my mind in that space. Being able to work in this in a different media, and actually had some advantages that gave me a deeper, more direct relationship to the totality of the experience.
I think of like Disney Hall down here as being such a different kind of building. So without being able to see sort of new buildings, if somebody was to describe Disney Hall to you when you're used to right angles and things, would you be able to see it in your mind's eye, or?
I think that particular building, I knew that visually, and had been there before I lost my sight. So I have the benefit of knowing and experience. I don't know how on earth you could ever describe that space, that building. In a case like that, you can't crawl over the building to understand it. You can't hear the words. You'd have to have a model to be able to explore, especially the exterior form of that architecture.
My understanding is now you're working a lot with making buildings accessible to people with disabilities, blind, by texture, and making floors different so they can hear the sound. Are you also designing buildings from scratch, or are you coming in existing projects and helping them make them more accessible?
Some of both. So there's some projects that I work on that are renovations. Most of them these days are brand new projects. They're often I'm joining the team after the project's underway, and the earlier that I get involved, the greater opportunity there is to really be more integrated, more thorough, more holistic, and how that process plays out.
So when you're going through a building and making it accessible, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think of, you having the cane, and, maybe section to section of the building has a different texture so you can tell where you are. Is that something where once you lost your sight, you were like, oh, this is so obvious, I should have been doing this all along?
Yeah, very much so. It's something that I started experiencing in my rehabilitation training for sight loss. There's part of the training is called orientation mobility training. It's where you're taught to get around effectively and efficiently with the use of a long white cane. And it's not just about, to glance at it being used, it's about like finding a hole or a curb or steps or trees in front of you, something like that. But there's so much more that goes on with the process of walking around. It's a very passive tool with a very active mind, trying to understand the environment around you. So it's everything from those obstacles, those things that come first to mind, but also it's about extending your sense of touch to the ground. So you're feeling the textures, but you're also from time to time tapping it to hear how the environment is sort of articulated around you when designing space, when designing the architecture. So yeah, it was very much about, I felt like to some extent, it was starting to complete my education in architecture once I was experiencing it without sight.
Do you feel that you have, in a savant way, acquired new skills, or do you think you've just honed these skills? Like you said, you have 40 years of visual memory of buildings. Is there anything that has come to you new that you thought, wow, I didn't know I had that ability, or just feel you're honing old abilities?
It's very much, I think, augmenting the old package. So, to some extent, I almost feel like my prior experience degrades from that deeper question, because I can't do a truly non-visual inspired space. I can't get away from my visual tool set and bias. I work hard to augment it with these other things. But I think with that augmentation, with the additional sort of tools or arrows within my quiver of things to work with, it really makes, whether it's, I can only say it's better than what I used to do when I was sighted, because it is a richer way of thinking about architecture. So yeah, I don't think there's any way I personally could have gotten there without this experience of sight loss.
Do you think back on any of the buildings you designed before you lost your sight and think, oh, I should revamp that to make it more accessible?
Well, there are those that I think about that, yeah, could have been more accessible. And I tend to think about accessibility on two different levels. One is the functional accessibility, and it's something that's more thought-provoking and interesting from the blind perspective of access to the beauty or access to the delight if you can't see it. And so how do you convey that sense of quality, of delight, of just richness of the architecture or the space, the environment, if you're not going to see it? And through that, that's where I feel like the architecture gets so much richer, so much better. And yeah, there are definitely projects that I was like, dang, I wish I could do that one again.
Everything gets rehabbed eventually, so maybe you'll get the chance. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I know how busy you are and successful you are with this. So thank you for taking the time out to talk to me.
Well, thanks so much, Ted. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. So thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.